So this week we're talking about chapter 6, and while that's loading, I'll just quickly talk about the difference between rhetorical analysis and what we've done so far. So we've been looking at narrative, and narrative can be a true story, and in our case it was a true story, but narrative is also fiction a lot of times. And when you analyze people's narratives, you're looking for things like literary devices. You could, of course, look for rhetorical devices as well, and I encouraged you to use an emotional argument. But in this case, a rhetorical analysis is a nonfiction piece that is generally informational but can also be persuasive, and it in fact should make some sort of argument if you're going to do rhetorical analysis. According to the book, everything's an argument, but specifically we're looking at speeches and articles, and sometimes even listening to things like podcasts or watching TED Talks to determine what it is the writer is trying to get across. So the argument, the purpose, and then also how that writer makes or speaker writes this piece. And is it effective? What does the writer do in order to persuade you, and what do you think about that? So it is your opinion in a way, but it's not a personal piece. So we're not talking about, I think the writer means this. I think the writer does a great job of this. It is not a review. It is instead completely third person. There will not be any first person pronouns in your rhetorical analysis essay, which we'll talk about much later. So your job is to be an objective reviewer in a way, but you're really not going to posit your opinion about whether or not you like the piece. So don't think of it like a movie review where you're picking apart a movie and talking about all the different things, the choices, the directorial choices, the lighting, and the characters. Instead, you're looking at this from the standpoint of what is it that this person just had to share with the world, and how does that writer or speaker do that? What techniques are done? Which appeals are made? And how does that all work together to convey the purpose? So what you're going to look for when we are analyzing a text is speaker. So who is the speaker? Not just, oh, it's so-and-so's name. Well, yes, that's not very informative. What I mean by that is, what are the characteristics of the speaker that you can infer based on the information you get in a bio? What can you infer about the speaker's beliefs, age, demographic, education level, any of those characteristics? So this is a profile of the speaker, so to speak. Then you're looking for the purpose. So what is it that the writer is trying to convey? You can think of this as your thesis statement or the argument. What is the argument being made? And why do you think this person who's writing or speaking is making the argument? Then you want to think about the audience. To whom is this piece targeted? So who is this written for? Are we talking about particular demographic, age, education level? So much like the speaker, you're going to think very specifically about who this is meant to reach. Are we thinking politicians, a certain political party? Are we thinking college students who are dealing with debt? Very specific profile of an audience is what I want, not adults, all people. That isn't going to cut it. Context is what is going on in the world, what went on in history, what's going on in the community that prompted this to be written. So you may have to do a little bit of research for this portion, but sometimes this is given within the text. Sometimes it's given in the information about the author that might be shared. You have to maybe do a little bit of inferring if you aren't able to find this information within the text, or figure out by searching like outside the text. And then exigence is a tricky one, but for our purposes, the difference between context and exigence is about the speaker or the writer. So that could be the same person, by the way. Most of the time it is, but not always. So Exigence means, what is it that this speaker is so passionate about that they really have to just share this message with the world? So, what is it in the speaker's life that prompted him or her to share this message? So, context is about outside the text. Exigence is about the speaker's life or whatever's going on specifically with the speaker. Think about, like, what is this passionate, burning thing inside them that makes them want to share this? Okay. So don't get confused, because it will seem like the context and exigence are the same, but I'm asking you to differentiate between them by thinking about things outside of the writer's life and outside of the text for context. And then I'm asking you to think about, what do you infer or know based on what the writer says is going on in that person's life that just makes them so passionate they have to share this. Now, choices, appeals, and tone are things that you're probably more familiar with. So, choices are rhetorical choices. And when I say that, I mean things like repetition, um, language choices, like a certain kind of diction. Do you see a lot of short, choppy sentences? Do you see a lot of long, complex sentences? Do you see a lot of exclamation points? Do you see figurative language, like lots of long descriptive things, sentences or phrases? I wouldn't say that you're going to have like long descriptive paragraphs necessarily, because this is not a narrative, but you never know. It could be a technique used. Um, are they using anecdotes? So we'll come up with a list of these choices, and if you are watching this video in an asynchronous class, then I will post one. But don't be so concerned with what to call it, just like a term. We're not going to study terms. Instead, I want you to think about, how is the writer making this argument? What techniques is this person using to make this argument? That's what you're going to write down, even if you don't know the term for it. Appeals. So choices are used to make appeals. So for example, if you're making an emotional appeal, then you are trying to target the audience. You're trying to get them to feel some type of way. So how is it that you make choices to do that? Well, you're going to use loaded language that has emotional adjectives or situations, personal anecdotes that tug at the heartstrings. Those choices make the appeals. We don't use appeals. We develop appeals by using choices. And then finally, tone. What is the attitude of the speaker? So, what sort of tone do you feel throughout? Now, it could be multiple. So, it might start out one way and develop into another. It might switch back and forth multiple times. There could be an overall tone for the piece. It's up to you to describe that, and I will also give you a resource for words that you might be able to use for tone. So, this is the other piece, the rhetorical triangle, and it's just important for you to understand who these appeals are really targeting. So when you try and build ethos, which again, all these are in the textbook for you to read more about, but when a speaker wants to develop ethos in a piece, or the writer, they use things like their status, their background, their experience, sometimes research, to have you trust what they are saying. So, this is a really common thing for politicians to try and do, or people who are trying to persuade others to do something. Audience, or to even change their beliefs. The audience is targeted with pathos, which you already know because we've studied arguments of emotion. And you can do things like trying to make your audience feel a certain way, particularly excited, sad, angry, jealous, any number of emotions, it says here. And then logos is kind of the most obvious one, and that is, when you're trying to get your message across and make it believable, you can use research, proof, if you will, evidence from outside sources to create a well-built argument. So those are the main takeaways for this chapter, but you are going to be applying SPACECAT, which is nothing more than a mnemonic device to help you figure out how to closely read and annotate a piece and discover all the things you will eventually need to write a rhetorical analysis. So SPACECAT is just a mnemonic device. So the first letter of each of those things I told you to look for in an argument when you're analyzing it. But what I've done here is created questions for you to answer in order to address each one of these things. So you will be applying this to your choice of pieces or to a podcast, depending on your class. And you are going to answer these questions. Now, how can you do this? Well, you can make a copy of this document and just answer the questions on the second column. You can just make your own document and put SPACECAT and then next to it, answer the questions. What you cannot do is write one word for any of these. These have to be written out, complete sentence answers. So that's really chapter 6 in a nutshell. There's more in there. We'll get more into it, the second step of it next time. But I just wanted to take some time to go over that with you so you kind of knew what I wanted you to take away and what was relevant in order for you to do the assignments.